Positivity rate continues to be under 1%, 0.8% I think it was, and one more fatality, damn it. But we are making progress. And because we're making progress, we're thinking about how we get back to a normal course of business, or at least a new normal here in the state capitol. We've spent a lot of time talking about how our businesses are getting back and how schools should be able to get back. So here at the state capitol, I just met with the legislative leadership, mainly electronically as we do things these days, thinking about the special session and what we want to get accomplished between now and July 31st. And together we agreed that we're going to have the special session focused on 4 bills. And assuming we can get agreement in principle on what those bills are going to be, I'm going to issue the call for the special session on Friday, and we should be meeting by early next week. As you know, bill number 1 is absentee balloting. Very important to me, and I think during the discussion, we don't want to see a long line of people waiting to vote in November, this way you've seen in Georgia and Wisconsin and some other places during the primary. We don't know what the COVID epidemic's going to look like, but assuming COVID is still with us, this would be a COVID-related opportunity to have absentee balloting so you can vote safely. And that's bill number 1 we've agreed on. We've also got the police accountability bill that I got to say, the Judiciary Committee on both sides of the aisle have been working very collaboratively on that over the course of the last month or so, reaching broad agreement. As I found out in life, you can move the ball 95 yards down the football field. It's that final 5 yards where you have to see what consensus we can reach, but I think we're broadly there, which I think is really important. It follows to some degree what we did with the state police in terms of our priorities and accountability, and in terms of community policing, and in terms of military gear, and in terms of training for our police. And we're going to have more on that very soon. Next up was telehealth. As you know, I issued an executive order some time ago allowing more of our healthcare visits to be done electronically, to be done via telehealth over the computer screen. And that's been very successful in the midst of COVID, where you didn't necessarily want a lot of people going back and forth. So that will be the 3rd bill that is, the legislature will consider in the special session. That only extends from now to the next regular session in January, and most importantly, it means that Medicaid will, and private insurance will pay for telehealth like they do pay for an in-person visit. I think it makes an awful lot of sense in this current environment. And finally, a bill is going to cap the costs on insulin, and I think we've got broad agreement on that. So those are the 4 bills. That's what the special session will be limited to. And I hope to be able to issue that call on Friday so we get going next week. And one other course of business that we're getting back to is the Bond Commission. As you know, the Bond Commission meets periodically to do capital projects that require borrowing. And that's what we've going to do next Tuesday, I think it is, the 21st. And we've issued the bond agenda. It's about $325 million. Most of it, about $200 million, is related to continuation on the upgrade of schools, or new schools, and the rest is related to some very special projects in and around IT and telecommunication and dams and some other things. And we'll probably do that via Zoom next week. So that's where we are as we slowly get back to a new normal here in the Capitol building. And I told the legislators, I look forward to seeing them again. This remote stuff gets a little dry, and I also told them I really appreciate the confidence they showed in me with the giving us the executive powers, emergency powers we needed to make some decisions over the last 4 months in and around COVID. And for that, I was appreciative. We've made good progress on that by working together. With that, Max, any questions?
Fox 61. Fox 61.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, sorry. So it's Zinnia Maldonado, Fox 61. My question was, Governor, could you talk about the voting process and how it will take place at the Capitol?
You want to talk to that, Paul?
I know the legislative leaders are working collaboratively to figure out how each individual chamber will be making their determinations, understanding not only our overall guidelines of social distancing, but also building guidelines. So that will be a question that's best formed for the legislative leaders, and they'll be able to give you a response.
Channel 3 Eyewitness News. NBC Connecticut.
Hi, Governor Matt Austin with NBC Connecticut. Just first off, just wanted to get your reaction to the Trump administration rescinding the policy concerning international students and online classes.
Yeah, Matt, I think it's an incredibly dumb policy. I think it's probably illegal. Certainly, I think it's immoral. But I do think that, it's causing incredible harm to our universities. There are an awful lot of international students that don't know whether they should come back now. I think it's wrong to force these schools to open for in-person learning, regardless of what the COVID infection rate is. Thankfully, it will impact Connecticut a little bit less, Matt, just because with our rates down at below 1%, right now we plan to be able to open for in-person learning at the university level, but I think it's incredibly disruptive around the rest of the country.
Also, just speaking around the country, we've seen a lot of delays in testing results, people waiting a week, 2 weeks just to get their COVID results back. Do we know where we are in Connecticut, how quickly, if somebody's tested today, they might receive their results?
Yeah, we're a little better off. As you maybe heard Josh say, and Kevin Lembo, our controller, negotiated preferential agreements between the state and most of the labs we're working on. So we can't be pushed to the back of the bus when it comes to getting our results. But we are watching it very carefully because there's a big surge in demand coming out of those highly infected states. And we're doing anything we can to control our own destiny by having labs within our borders here take the lead on testing.
News 8. The Hartford Current.
Yes, Governor, I wanted to know specifically what types of changes are needed in the absentee ballot laws. By that I mean there's some concerns about thousands and thousands of people flooding small towns with a large amount of ballots, and some of the registrars say you can't even open the ballots till 10 a.m. on that day to count them. Are you considering changes in the law that would allow, for example, that the registrars or anyone opening them could open them earlier so that the vote count wouldn't last, for 2 or 3 days?
That's a very specific question, Chris. I can tell you that Denise Merrill, our Secretary of State, is aggressively working on that, working with the registrars, making sure they have the capacity they need. We do have federal funding, so we can get some additional people on board to make sure all the absentee ballots can be counted on an expeditious basis. But again, given the nature of COVID, even within our state, I think it's really important that our voters, in particular our older voters, or those with a pre-existing condition, have a choice where they don't necessarily have to go and line up to vote. That's why the absentee is so important.
Okay, also on the special session, it sounds like you're going to stick pretty tightly to these 4 bills. By that I asked, there was a press conference today regarding affordable housing, for example. Do you think issues such as affordable housing, education, are just too big to tackle next week?
I do, and I think the legislative leadership does as well. So our special session is focused on those 4 items. Whether we have another session maybe in September, time will tell.
Okay.
Hearst, Connecticut Media.
Hi, Governor. It's Caitlin Krasselt again from Hearst. I am wondering on the insulin bill, is that the same bill that went through the committee process before the legislature shut down?
I think it is, isn't it, Caitlin?
Yeah, so that bill under the regular session was Senate Bill 1.
Okay. Great. I believe that there are a bunch of groups that are concerned about immigrants and not receiving enough aid and that sort of thing. Have you heard from them, and do you have any plans to meet with those groups?
I didn't get that
I missed.
exactly.
Yeah, Caitlin, can you just restate your question, please?
Oh, sorry. There are several groups, advocacy groups representing the immigrant population that are still feeling underserved in the midst of the pandemic. Have you heard from them? Are you planning to meet with them?
I'm happy to meet with them. We're working with all these communities, and especially the immigrant community. You heard the question previously about there's really some discrimination there. It comes in terms of foreign students and coming to our colleges. William Tong is addressing that with litigation. Our immigrant community, we've got a variety of programs in place to make sure that they have the resources and the safety they need as we get back to our new normal. One, I'll tell you, is my daughter's taken a particular interest in, frankly. It's for the undocumented. We doubled the amount of money. They've been able to raise that privately. And these are folks that are not only getting a debit card to give them some financial resources, also incentives to go get tested and introduction to a primary care doc. So we're doing everything we can for the immigrant community.
Raised privately through what entity?
That's 4CT.
4CT.
Oh, okay, just making sure. Thank you.
CT News Junkie.
Hi, Governor. Can you explain a little bit more about telehealth, and are we applying the same rates for reimbursement are you doing it for Medicaid, and are you asking the private insurance companies to continue the same amount of reimbursement?
Yeah, yes, and yes, Christine. It's for privates as well as Medicaid. It's the same rate of reimbursement. It's really important that we be able to continue this telehealth, at least now through the next session. At that point, I'd like to do something broader, because I think telehealth is going to be, telemedicine, a big part of our future, with an opportunity to provide better access to healthcare services at a lot less cost.
Did legislative leaders go over with you the public hearing process?
Yeah. They have discussed that for at least the first two bills that the governor mentioned. That was part of the governor's letter, that they're looking to have potentially a public hearing on police accountability on Friday, and then early next week on absentee ballots. For the other two bills, that is still to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
WTIC 1080 News.
Hi, Governor. I know we're not doing COVID as the primary topic today, but the list of states did change as far as people who have to quarantine and don't. Any comment on that?
Yeah, it gives you a sense that the rate of infection continues to expand. Our metrics are pretty clear. 10%, we're down below 1%, but these are states that are testing 10% positive, everybody out there. It added Wisconsin, which was interesting to me. There's supposed to be a Democratic convention there in a month. So, but yes, we've added on a few more states, and we're working right now on that certification process in terms of folks flying in from these infected states. We ought to have that up within a week.
Thank you.
News 8.
Good afternoon, everyone. Governor, will Connecticut require students and teachers to be COVID tested before returning?
I think certainly for those in the residence halls, that's not a requirement from us, but I think I've heard from all the universities that's what we're doing. Josh is working with the universities right now. We get them to the front of the line, make sure they have that testing available. How frequent that'll be, I think they're still working out with the universities, but they will be tested.
The Waterbury Republican American.
Thank you. Governor, I'd just like to follow up a little bit on this housing question. Senator Anwar, the Senate chairman of the Housing Committee, said today at that news conference that just doing police reform is not. It's as he described it, a symptomatic treatment, and we need a therapeutic treatment. Certainly, I mean, his 49-page bill is very extensive, and so was the agenda that was outlined. But can you give us an idea of why housing matters aren't being taken up?
I can start. I mean, I haven't even seen the bill yet. I'm not sure. It didn't come up as our discussion today. I think housing is obviously something very important to legislators and me, folks on both sides of the aisle. And I certainly got a sense that some of these bigger issues, such as housing, may be deferred to a September session. We have a little more time to opine on it, get some more public hearings, a little more time to gestate.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, as the governor stated, it hasn't been formally presented to the governor's office or to the administration, this bill. And as well, it did not come up as part of the discussion for the special session. We do understand the various issues behind housing, very much so. Salem Mosquero Bruno, our commissioner, has been leading the charge both in Department of Housing as well as CHFA. But as with a lot of issues and understanding the time frame that we have, this is an issue that we'll have further discussions on in the coming months.
Okay, putting that specific bill aside, I mean, it's just a draft piece of legislation. Was there any discussion of housing policy in this meeting, and any sort of decision made to revisit it in September? Or, you know, I'm just trying to get a sense of what the discussion entailed, if housing even came up.
We were really focused on the 4 bills that we wanted to get clarified and out the door and voted on next week. But there was a sense that there's some other big things we've got to be doing as a state. Without specifically mentioning housing, we specifically talked about having a session this fall to be able to address some of that.
And in terms of the travel advisory, you were talking about making some sort of decisions regarding enforcement issues. Anything new to report on that? You just said it was going to take effect in a week or so, and I think yesterday you were talking about this weekend.
All I know is they're drafting the language right now. They're working closely with New York, so our language more or less mirrors each other, given our different statutory requirements. And I'm hoping that when you're presented this, when you get off the plane, you have to tell us not only that you understand the quarantining, where you're going to quarantine, who you've been traveling with, and how we can contact you is one way to be able to monitor what people are doing. I think people will self-regulate, but we're going to watch that carefully.
Okay, thank you very much.
The Associated Press.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Governor, I just wanted to clarify on the absentee balloting legislation. Is this just for this coming November's election, or would this be vote by mail going forward forever?
No, it's related to COVID, so it's really focused on this November. You know, our emergency powers allowed us to do it through the primary in August, but not into November.
Would you like to see that taken up in the regular session, expanded vote by mail?
Yeah, I guess we ought to do it one step at a time, but I think it'll be interesting to see how it works this November. But our bill is specific to this November, assuming we have some level of COVID infection still in place. If there's no COVID, if there's a vaccine that's out there and working, we'd take a second look. But this is focused on that election.
And are there any concerns of the legal challenges possibly I guess maybe an injunction going through that would stop this from being allowed, because there's a lot of resistance.
Oh, man, that didn't come up today. I think we're moving ahead. I think there's going to be a vote. We're going to have a way that you can vote safely in the middle of a pandemic in November. So I hope the litigants just let us do this.
And one more question. I've been hearing people talk about visiting hours, opening up nursing homes for visits sometime in September, like it's a done deal. Is that really happening?
What I do know is many nursing homes right now are already allowing visitation. I think it's primarily outside. It's not different folks coming in, but trusted family members, a narrow cohort, if you will. And maybe there's some discussions about how you could make that a little broader in September. I haven't heard that yet.
But that's something that you don't have to issue an executive order about regarding nursing home visits?
We certainly allowed the visitations to the degree we have right now for the outdoor visitations. And I think we should be very strict about the nature of the visitations going forward. But that is a lens that we'll be opening up.
Thank you.
If things keep going well, Sue.
Okay. Thank you. Good point. Thank you.
News 12 Connecticut.
Hi, everyone. Governor, on the special session, I just want to clarify, you are looking at an in-person session with no type of remote debate or voting, right?
People are certainly becoming in person, Paul.
As we stated, that is being currently determined by the legislative leaders. As I said, that's a question best served for them.
My understanding, though, is that the public hearings will be electronic.
Correct.
Yeah, so how would the public participate in that? Would that be like a Zoom call that they would log into?
Yeah, talk to the leaders, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, it's very similar to how various meetings have already occurred on the legislative side already. I know the Appropriations Committee and others have held various informational and other meetings, and as well as we recently had the judicial system who had a meeting that had public participation digitally through Zoom.
I mean, I'm just thinking, though, thinking back to the vaccine debate where you had hours and hours of people, this police reform bill is probably going to have hundreds and hundreds of people who want to testify. How do you manage that electronically?
I think you get in the queue on the teleconference, whatever that platform is, similar to how you do it in person. It's not too dissimilar from what we're doing here, only maybe a lot more interesting.
Would you guys maybe have people come, get an assigned time? I'm only asking because I know viewers are going to ask, how's this going to work?
That's a form and responsibility of the legislative branch, and I know that they have been working diligently for months preparing for a special session, so I think that's a question that's best served for them, and they'll be prepared to answer it.
But you're absolutely right. We've got to get that information out to people. If they want to participate, they know how they can. That's a good question.
And just one other question. I want to follow up on Paul's question real quick. You're talking about drafting enforcement language for the travel advisory to closely mirror New York. If I remember correctly, Governor Cuomo has been talking about levying up to $2,000 fines on people who violate the order. Are we looking at fines in Connecticut? And if so, how would that be levied?
We're not looking at fines at this point.
The Connecticut Mirror.
Governor, related to the absentee ballot legislation is the question of will the Secretary of State again do a mass mailing of absentee ballot applications? Did that come up as part of the conversation today? Senator Pisano certainly has been interested in that.
He has been interested in that. It did come up. It was pointed out that our language in the absentee ballot law that we're trying to put in place does not speak to whether she sends the applications out to everybody or upon request. But as you know, Denise feels if we send it out to everybody, you're more likely to get better and higher participation.
And it's quite, I understand that you're talking about housing coming up in another special session, but has the administration begun work on either analyzing what Desegregate Connecticut put forward today or some other piece of legislation that you might propose, whether it be in September or in regular session next January?
I don't know what was put forward today. I think we have to take a quick look at that. And then I'll be meeting with the leaders in terms of what else we ought to do going forward. I got to confess, we haven't focused specifically on that yet.
Yeah, we haven't formally been presented the bill by the chairman of the Housing Committee.
All right, Governor, do you have an opinion just generally on the question of whether or not the state of Connecticut should require cities and towns to allow multifamily housing? Currently, there are more than a dozen towns that do not allow it under any circumstance.
I don't have the answer to that right now. I do know that I believe in incentives. I believe in developing downtowns. I like places where people can live, where they can walk to transportation. And I think that's just as true in smaller towns and suburban towns as it is in our bigger cities.
Thank you.
All right, I'm getting a signal. That's it, everybody. Because the metrics are still going in the right direction, we wanted to devote this to what we're doing to get our state capital going in the right direction as well, and that's going to start with a special session and a bond commission meeting next week. Thank you, everybody.